For as shiny and oh so wonderfully damp as most modern horror games can be, there's something about old school horror games that's often just so much more unnerving. Fuzzy, clunky, itchy, tasty, retro horror games have this feel to them that you can't quite replicate today. Or can you? Well, today's games I'm covering are modern retro horror bangers that you should really sign up for. There's Bleak, and then there's Trench Warfare Bleak. That's just a rung above trying to order a new passport, in my opinion. Conscript from Australian solo developer Jordan Moki is a top-down survival horror set in the First World War, traditionally seen as not a great time. The mud, blood and mustard gas would already be horrific enough without the supernatural bits and bobs kicking off. Conscript takes clear inspiration from the early Resident Evil games. You got limited saves, tight inventory management, perhaps too tight, and claustrophobic level design. Only instead of zombies in a mansion, you're crawling through mazes of trenches, bunkers, and ruined villages. The perspective is top-down and pixelated, but don't let that fool you. It's a punishing, methodical game. Ammunition is scarce, enemies can easily overwhelm, and even finding your way through the labyrinth and dugouts feels like a victory. There's also a layer of historical detail running beneath the dread. Real uniforms, authentic weaponry, and that crushing sense of soldiers being chewed up by a machine they can't control. Fun! A lot of horror fans praise it for doing something different with the genre, and though it is obviously inspired by the classics, it is very much its own thing. Conscript demands patience and a bit of masochism. Personally speaking, I did end up bouncing off it after a lot of backtracking and really tight inventory management, but if you're curious about a survival horror game that weaponizes the horror of history itself, this is one amazing looking game about something very ugly that you can check out on PC, PS5, PS4, Xbox and Switch. You've never really video gamed until you've trudged through the Swiss Alps while being menaced by haymen and eldritch barnyard demons. Undawn, developed almost entirely by one bloke, is a first-person horror adventure that is pretty steeped in folklore. Every texture in the game is penciled by hand, which gives the whole thing the look of a cursed sketchbook come to life, and also generally just looks bloody lovely. You play as a man returning to his remote mountain village after his grandfather's mysterious death. The plot boasts goats with too many eyes, ominous peaks, fire-scarred chapels, and that constant sense that the mountains themselves aren't particularly thrilled with your presence. You're mostly solving puzzles, sneaking past uncanny figures, and trying not to panic. Literally, the game has a fear system where your character shakes and stumbles if he's overwhelmed, which is kinda neat. Over the past few years, it's built a quite cult reputation, especially among players tired of factory line horror that just borrows film jump scares, so animatronics. Undawn feels like a tale you'd hear in a mountain tavern after too much schnapps, or something A24 will be adapting pretty much any day now. Undawn is available on PC, PS5, PS4, Xbox and Switch. Should you check it out? Absolutely. Just use your eyes, man. Sorry about that. There aren't many games where the apocalypse shows up looking like a Net Your Rose bootleg and asks if you fancy a Benson and Hedges. Sorry We're Closed takes the survival horror framework of Resident Evil and dunks it in the unholy cocktail of PS1 grit, early 2000s goth kitsch, and the kind of apocalyptic weirdness you would expect from a half-remembered anime DVD you took a chance on from Blockbuster that one time. You play as Michelle, a misfit who's only got a few days left before the end of the world. Instead of saving humanity, she spends her time scouring grimy backstreets, chatting with bizarre NPCs, and blasting away at monsters that look like they crawled out of a 9 Inch Nails video. Fixed camera angles, stiff combat, and awkward tank controls are all here, but so is first-person shooting and a commitment to being as squelchy as possible. But people aren't coming to Sorry We're Closed for polished gunplay or slide cancelling or whatever. They're here for the vibes, cursed arcades and grotesque bosses, and while it isn't technically that scary, you can find those vibes for yourself on PC, PS5, PS4, Xbox and Switch. If you've ever wanted a survival horror that feels like the t-shirt section of a HMV exploded, then yes, absolutely, you should check this game out. Right, I don't know when it came about, maybe thanks to Breath of the Wild and Death Stranding, but I am all aboard the climbing as a main mechanic in a video game train. But this one definitely ain't Jusant. I did quite like that game though, quite good. In White Knuckle, you're clawing your way up a spooky science silo rendered in PS1 era wobble, where every ledge looks like it's about to collapse and the only thing below you is an endless void. Or is it just a void? The controls are awkward and kind of alien at first by design, and it feels like the game's about as easy to grasp as, well, a wall in a weird silo. You'll slip, you'll fall, you'll swear, and then you'll do it all over again. It's a lot to figure out at once, especially when it comes to using the tools. But the thing with White Knuckle is that it's actually about rhythm. Once you start to fall into the game's pace, it really does pick up. People who've stuck with it swear by that moment when it clicks, and yeah, it does feel a lot like this. The horror here is subtle but potent. There's just a very oppressive atmosphere that makes you feel like you have to rush, and the rising something doesn't help that either. Every misgrip could mean death, and that's before you've even seen the things grabbing for you from below. Oh boy, are they some squelchy boys right here. But should you check it out? Well, if you've got the patience to let a game bully you a bit before showing you its groove, and you don't mind it being in Steam Early Access, then yeah, it is worth the climb. The best compliment I can give this one is that it feels like a PS1 game that they were too afraid to release, but someone eventually found it under lock and key in an old, potentially haunted warehouse. Labyrinth of the Demon King is a first-person dungeon crawler that traps you in the bowels of a ruined castle. Every wall looks damp, every corridor looks the same, and every corner feels like it's hiding something that really shouldn't be, breathing. Remember, sometimes the best creature design calls science a liar. Swords and spears feel hefty and heavy, and enemies lurch at you like your sleep paralysis demons got real busy. It's not about slick action, it's just about getting through the day. There's a proper survival horror loop here that sees you scrounging for keys, inching down hallways, praying you've got just enough stamina to get through the next fight. And when you do finally kill something, it doesn't feel like a victory so much as just buying yourself a few more anxious minutes. Labyrinth of the Demon King hasn't exactly exploded into the mainstream, but it's definitely earned attention from horror fans who like their scares lo-fi and the mood to feel very chunky indeed. It really does feel like a brand new PS1 game in all the best ways. It's available on PC, PS5, PS4, Xbox and Switch. But should you check it out? Well, if you ever wanted Kingsfield to lean harder into dread and demon guts, then yes, just don't expect it to be easy. You might even say it's murder. If you've ever wanted to know what it feels like to be trapped in a grainy VHS tape, Murder House has you covered. Puppet combo slash a nightmare dumps you into an abandoned house with a serial killer in a bunny suit, and then twist the knife by making you play it with fixed camera angles, tank controls, and crunchy PS1 visuals. This is survival horror stripped down to basically the bone. You've got loads of doors, stiff combat, and that awful creeping dread of maybe turning around a bit too slowly. The setup is pure bargain bin horror movie, and it's a wonder we don't see much more like it really within games. A news crew sneaks into the wrong house at the wrong time, and the Easter Ripper isn't exactly in the mood for interviews. What follows is a tense game of hide and seek where the camera does as much to kill you as the killer. Puppet combo leans into the awkwardness of old horror design, and instead of breaking immersion, it just makes the whole thing feel nastier. Since release, Murder House has become hugely influential in the indie horror space. You can also even play this one in first person now. Its mix of lo-fi PS1 aesthetics and unapologetically nasty slasher tropes has inspired a flood of throwback horror games on itch.io and Steam, and it's also interesting how it plays around with its narrative in ways I won't spoil here. Worth playing this Halloween? Absolutely, if only to see the game that arguably kicked off the current PSX horror revival and proved you don't need to see the blood glisten off of someone's chin hair for it to be terrifying. Alyssa feels like someone traced the edges of old Resident Evil and Silent Hill, but then painted it over with American McGee's Alice. There's not much out there like this. You play as elite royal agent Alyssa, who's chasing a fugitive criminal into a twisted Victorian mansion, only to find yourself stuck in a surreal dollhouse full of mechanized humanoid dolls, pre-rendered backgrounds, and tank controls. Your pistol and melee options offer defense against the weird mechanical bastards dotted around the gaff, but ammo is limited and hitting your shots with the super faithful controls to the 5th generation isn't a given. It's super faithful to old survival horror, in fact, to the point where your very first encounter is basically a remake of the iconic first zombie in Resident Evil 1. It's also a tough game, and a tough game for you to kind of like reprogram your mind to really get on board with. It really is like a PS1 horror game that someone forgot to press the print button on. I nearly bounced off it quite a lot when I first played it, but you can at least find and buy gear, weapons and outfits with tooth wheels from a vendor who's like a mix of the vendor from Onimusha and the merchant from RE4. Since its release, Alyssa has built a nice loyal following of sickos. Yeah, not everyone loves its clunky parts, but people who dig old school survival horror and weird art design and atmospheric dread get way into gear with it. Check it out on PC, PS5, PS4, Xbox and Switch. There is even a demo for it available, and also Alyssa the Parting is due sometime soon. Can you spot the next game coming right up? Fear the Spotlight asks a pretty simple question. What if your high school seance actually worked? What do you mean you never had a seance? Oh, you just got drunk and put things on fire instead? Okay, fair enough. You play as Vivian, a teenager sneaking around a wrecked 1990s school with your friend Amy after things go very wrong during a candle-lit ritual. Instead of lockers and textbooks, you're left with collapsed hallways, flickering lights, and a thing that really doesn't want you poking around. Probably the least well-known and, spotlighted game of today, the game plays out in third person with deliberately PS1 style textures, hazy lighting, and that slightly off geometry. You'll spend most of your time creeping through classrooms, solving small puzzles, and hiding when the monster draws too close. What keeps it from being just another lo-fi scare project is the heart underneath. Vivian and Amy's friendship gives the story a personal edge that sticks with you once the credits roll. Fear the Spotlight comes from Cozy Game Pals, a two-person studio, and ended up being one of Blumhouse Games' first published titles. Despite no co-op, as you might expect from something like this, if you've got a soft spot for Clock Tower, Rule of Rose, or the stranger corners of 90s survival horror, this is a short modern retro banger to put on your list on PC, PS5, PS4, Xbox and Switch. And no, I'm not joking. Sometimes you just see a game for the first time, you're like, yep, I'll play that. No, I'm Not Human is Papers, Please meets The Strangers meets Bird Box. It's a horror visual novel hybrid where you're trapped in your house with a group of strangers when a worldwide cataclysmic event kicks off. And the twist is that some of them aren't human. Your job is to sniff out who's who before the wrong decision gets everyone killed. And sometimes you can even correct your mistakes with a shotgun. Or did you make a mistake? This is a game that constantly has you second guessing just every decision basically. Here you've got chunky low poly models, jagged edges and that unsettling lighting that makes it feel like Courage the Cowardly Dog gone very wrong. Conversations are framed with lo-fi character portraits that wouldn't be out of place in a Salad Fingers episode, but with even more lashings of mounting dread. Somehow. It's less about fighting monsters in the dark, more about the fear of the person sitting next to you. People will come to your door every evening and you have to decide whether to let them in or turn them away. Where it gets messy is that sometimes those telltale signs of them being normal or not can be pretty hard to spot. This setup keeps the tension constant, and every encounter is another chance to second guess yourself. If you like the thing but wish there were more creepy smiles and increasingly depressing fridges, this is the kind of game that will get under your skin, just unfortunately on PC right now. Right, let's worm our way over to the final game of the day. Just to really sell it, can you turn me into an actual worm? Just make me a worm? That's got to be pretty easy editing, takes 10 minutes, right? Lovely. Cheers! Heartworm is a modern retro survival horror by Vincent Adinolfi, published by DreadXP. You play as Sam, who's a young woman grieving her grandfather, a lot of that going around, who follows a rumour about a house in the mountains that can connect the living with the dead. What she finds is a maze of uncanny rooms, warped geometry, and shadows that are more than slightly cheeky. It's built straight out of the late 90s playbook. You've got fixed camera angles, tank controls, awkward combat, and even CG cutscenes that look like they were pressed onto a scratched PS1 disc. The real hook though is Sam's camcorder. It's not just for tumblecore aesthetic, as you use it to uncover hidden details, solve puzzles, and even defend yourself against the things crawling in the dark. It ties neatly into the game's theme of memory and grief, turning something nostalgic into a literal survival tool. More than anything, Heartworm feels like a love letter to 90s horror just generally. It's moody, clunky in the right ways, and it's unafraid to let atmosphere do most of the work, though it doesn't seem to have hit a huge audience pretty much at all, which is a shame. If you've still got space in your heart for Silent Hill, Resident Evil, or Fatal Frame, and want something that captures their spirit without just copying them, this one's an easy recommendation if you have a PC. If you have any more modern retro horror bangers to share, be sure to share them? Yes, do that. Down below in the comments below. This is what I'm like without a script. And I'll be sure to read them, and we can make a follow-up video. I've been Jimmy for Cultured Vultures. Been good to have you. I'll see you in the next one.